Hello and welcome to ILTV's Elections Arena. I'm Aaron Porras, and today we have big news to discuss as coalition negotiations falter. But first, for our guest today, please welcome columnist for Newsweek and editor of HistoryCentral.com, Mark Schulman, and Dr. Martin Sherman, the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Thank you so much for coming in, gentlemen. How was your Sukkot holiday?
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
You spend it with family? You have a nice chag, nice break away from everything? Come back to all this politics.
But it's time for Chagim to be over. We're after the Chagim now, finally.
Exactly. That's a very good point. And so let's move on to our first topic on that note. Prime Minister Netanyahu's deadline for forming a government is now just a day away, and with no feasible prospects in the works, Netanyahu is staying true to his word by returning the mandate back to President Rivlin. But taking to social media on Monday as he marked his 70th birthday, Netanyahu blames rivals Benny Gantz, Yair Lapid, and Avigdor Lieberman for his failure to negotiate a coalition, a unity coalition that the Prime Minister still asserts can come about.
ערב טוב, אזרחי ישראל. לפני זמן קצר הודעתי לנשיא המדינה שאני מחזיר לידיו את המנדט להרכבת הממשלה. מאז שקיבלתי את המנדט, פעלתי ללא הרף, גם בגלוי, גם בסתר, כדי להקים ממשלת אחדות לאומית רחבה. זה מה שהעם רוצה. זה גם מה שישראל צריכה, אל מול האתגרים הביטחוניים שהולכים וגדלים מדי יום, מדי שעה. במהלך השבועות האחרונים עשיתי כל מאמץ כדי להביא את בני גנץ לשולחן המשא ומתן. כל מאמץ כדי להקים ממשלה לאומית רחבה. כל מאמץ כדי למנוע בחירות נוספות. לצערי, פעם אחר פעם, הוא פשוט סירב. גנץ התעשת. אם הוא ישתחרר מהלפיתה של לפיד וליברמן, אם הוא יזנח את רעיון ממשלת המיעוט, נוכל להקים יחד את הממשלה שמדינת ישראל כל כך זקוקה לה בעת הזאת. ממשלת אחדות לאומית רחבה של כל אלה המאמינים במדינת ישראל כמדינה יהודית, כמדינה דמוקרטית. זה היה הפתרון, וזה נשאר הפתרון.
All right, Mark, I want to turn to you first. What do you think? Is a broad unity government the only option, as Netanyahu is insinuating?
No, Netanyahu's insisting on the broad unity government because he insists on bringing along the Haredim and, of course, Yamina and the National Religious Party of the past. The reality is that a coalition can be formed in 30 seconds between Gantz, Likud, and Lieberman, as long as the man on the screen finally said, after losing 2 elections, it's time for me to go home. In any other country in the world, a prime minister who effectively lost 2 elections, after all the 2 elections, he did not form. He lost completely. Twice he was elected. Twice. It's the only time in Israeli history that a prime minister has not been able to form a government after the election. So twice he lost, not because of anything. The results are what counts. Twice he lost, and in any other place, after losing twice.
Because Lieberman. Because Lieberman reneged on his election pledges in the first election.
Dr. Sherman, I'll come back. I'll return to you in a second.
The results. This time, for sure, everyone knew for sure that Lieberman was not going to go with Netanyahu. So this time, he lost without a shadow of a doubt. Likud lost 200,000 votes from this election to last election. He lost the election. Now, in any other place in the world,
the most amazing thing is that the people who get or the bloc that got lesser votes. If you take the Zionist camp,
what Zionists? The Haredim are Zionists? They're not Zionists anymore. More Haredim go to the army. They're more Bedouin in the army than there are Haredim.
I've never heard the Haredim oppose Israel's existence
as a Jewish state. Yes, they have.
No, they have.
Absolutely. What are you kidding? The whole history of the Haredi movement is that they don't accept Zionism.
You know what? Many of the Haredi movements have, especially in Shas, have served in the army.
But that's past, not today. Today's young Shasniks do not go to the army. None of the Haredim go to the army today, except those that are falling out of the Haredi movement. The reality is,
true.
It is true. They're more Bedouin.
The number of Haredim in the army is going up and up.
No, those are only people who've left the Haredi movement. Those are not real Haredim. No, that's a fake number.
Okay.
But anyway, that's not the point. You broke in. It's not the point.
What is the point?
The point of the matter is he lost 2 sets of elections. In any normal situation, almost every other parliamentary democracy in the world, he would have resigned at this point. And in 2 minutes, there's a coalition. The only thing standing between a coalition and new elections is the fact that Bibi Netanyahu insists on remaining prime minister. The reality is he lost 2 elections. He's about to be indicted. He's certainly been accused of all sorts of crimes. There is no place else in a parliamentary democracy where the prime minister would say, okay, I'm sorry, I'm 70 years old, I've tried, I've had a wonderful run, I'm the longest running prime minister in history, it's time for me to move aside. If he moved aside and gave to Gideon Sa'ar, I don't care, any one of the Likud people to represent the Likud, there will be a coalition in 1 minute. That's what the country wants.
You know, this is the most amazing contention. In both elections, Netanyahu's camp won more than the opposing camp, not counting the Arabs, of course, unless you want to, if you want to add the Arabs to Gantz, which Gantz himself, at least at the moment, rejects. Netanyahu has been the longest-serving prime minister because he's been elected time and time again. He has huge accomplishments. I'm not an uncritical apologist for Netanyahu. I have my own criticisms of Netanyahu. But he's had great achievements. In democracies, you don't vote people in or out only because how long they've been in office. You vote for them for their achievements. And Netanyahu has huge achievements in the economy, in diplomacy, in the superpower relationship. In whatever field that you look at, Israel has been completely transformed under the incumbency of Netanyahu. Now, his opponents cannot dislodge him at the polls, so they're trying now a legalistic coup with the most ridiculous claims. You know that getting 2 vaguely positive articles covering his activities is somehow bribery, or he got an inappropriate amount of champagne and cigars.
Okay, we'll talk about the indictments in a little bit, but let's stick with the coalition talks.
The coalition, yeah, go ahead. The reality is that if he pulled aside, there would be a government. Literally in 5-10 minutes, maybe half an hour, there'll be a government. Now, additionally, there are only 3 possibilities right now. We have 3 possibilities ahead of us. Number 1 is at the last minute, some of the Likud members realize if we go to 3rd elections, Likud is going to lose worse in the 3rd elections. All indications are they'll do worse the 3rd time around, not because the Likud members are going to go and vote for blue and white. They're just going to stay home because they've had enough. Number 2 option is if Lieberman hates Netanyahu more than he hates the Arabs, he'll allow a minority government to be formed temporarily. A government will be created with support with Lieberman, maybe the inside or the outside, support from the Arabs on the outside. A government will be formed long enough again for a coup to take place in Likud and for someone else to replace Netanyahu in Likud, and at that point, a broader coalition will be created. The 3rd option is elections once again. Those are the 3 things.
You don't see any other possibility of Gantz forming a coalition?
But you see, what you're trying to do now is to impose a result which was not a result that was voted for.
Look, I understand something. The reason we went to elections the first time, the very first time we went to elections, is because Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted to have elections before he was indicted. That's why he ran to have elections.
No.
He had the first set of elections. He was unable, you can claim what the reasons were, he was unable to form a government at the end of those elections. So, don't give me any only. I'm just stating a fact. I'm stating
more people voted for right. More people voted for the right.
He was unable to form a government.
Than the left wing.
He was unable.
And you put together blue and white.
He was unable to
blue and white. Let's bring it back.
You know what?
No, I'm sorry. You can't say.
Netanyahu's achievement is in some ways remarkable. He had
did he form a coalition?
He did not form a coalition. He didn't form a coalition the first time.
He didn't form a coalition.
He then insisted on having 2nd elections without giving Gantz the opportunity of forming a government.
Gantz had no chance.
Excuse me. He didn't leave Gantz the ability to form a government. Excuse me. You decided that.
Regardless.
The Israeli system says that you give back the mandate to the president, and the president gives it to the 2nd person. He didn't do that. He short-circuited that and called a 2nd election. In the 2nd election, he did worse than he did in the 1st election. That's not a question. He did worse the 2nd time around. So now we're in a situation we have more people in the country.
For all its advantages, one of the drawbacks of democracy is that you can never blame the dictators for your fate. And if the Israeli electorate is unable to elect a government with a clear majority, it will have to live with the consequences.
But the fact of the matter is that the majority...
No, you want the minority.
Let's talk about Gantz's chances, though, because we discussed... You just made mention of how in the first time around after April, Netanyahu did not give back the mandate to Rivlin, who would have at that point probably given it to Gantz, although we'll never know. At this point, he's expected to give Gantz now...
With the results of the previous election, Gantz had no chance.
Well, so at this point, if you include all 13 of the Arab members and everyone except for Lieberman in the right-wing bloc, it brings Gantz and the left to 57 seats, short of the 61. is there any chance that in order to avoid third elections, they poach somebody on the right, maybe not from the Likud, or Lieberman joins him in the end?
It's clearly possible. The reality is that, look, there are different issues in Israel. They go back and forth. There are three series of issues. There's security, question of what to do with the West Bank, Yehuda v'Shomron. That's one set of issues. There's the issue of religion and state. That's one set of issues that divide the country. And finally, the social issues. Now, you can pick one of those three and build different coalitions if you decide you're going to work on one item and not the other two at the same time.
So based on what is in best interests of the individual parties and what they hold to be most sacred or most important, what do you think is the most plausible
The most
coalition?
plausible coalition would be a possible breakaway from Likud.
You
That's
really
a possible.
think
The reality, look,
the Likud would join a government that
excuse me,
that depends on Arabs.
Excuse me. Tell him that part of Gantz's party are all ex-Likudniks.
Yeah,
they were all
precisely.
So excuse me.
My point.
My point
of blue and white is not Netanyahu.
No,
they've got
they can get five
common
more
factors.
They can get five more people.
Coalition. That's the question.
They can get five. They can get five more Likudniks to decide to move to Tel Aviv.
Anyone from the anyone from the right wing who joins a government that is only in existence because of the support, whether passive or active, of the Arab parties, is basically finished politically. Lieberman knows that. Lieberman can't join a government and that's supported by the Arabs. He can't.
So what do you predict, that even if there is some sort of unity government, it'll fall apart?
I don't think a third round of elections is out of the question. I don't think so.
It is out of the question. For sure it's not out of the question. It's very possible, but the reality is there'll only be one person who'll be blamed in the end. It'll be Prime Minister Netanyahu.
No, it'll be Lieberman.
It won't be Lieberman.
It will be Lieberman.
It will not be. Everyone went into this election.
Lieberman betrayed his voters.
Excuse me.
Lieberman betrayed his voters.
The second time around, he didn't betray his voters, and he got more votes. He made it very clear this time that he was not going in with Netanyahu, that he was trying to form a coalition of three parties without Netanyahu. The reality is that's what happened this time. Lieberman is not going to go down. What's going to happen is Likud people are going to stay home. The reality is the country is going to blame Netanyahu, because without Netanyahu sitting there, there is a government.
They voted for Netanyahu.
Why should you? They didn't vote for. They voted Likud. They voted for Shas. They voted for Yadut Torah. They didn't vote.
They didn't vote because they knew Netanyahu would be prime minister.
They voted. Yadut Torah didn't vote.
Who was Shas's candidate for prime minister?
They mentioned Netanyahu. So what? But they voted for Shas.
Who's Yamina's candidate for prime minister?
They said it was.
So he's making a good point, though. Actually, is that in terms of mandates for Prime Minister Netanyahu, got 55 to Gantz's 54.
No, because all the Arabs. No, excuse me. Everybody who voted for the Arab groups voted against Netanyahu. There's not one person who voted for the...
Precisely.
That's right.
Precisely.
Exactly. So what's your point? The citizens of this country, the majority of citizens...
The anti-Zionists.
So what position do you think is... What position do you think the Arab parties play then in the government? Just purely oppositional?
Can you imagine if they were discussing military operations against Gaza or against Lebanon or against Syria?
Just because they're in the coalition doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be on the security cabinet.
But how can you have them? How can you have them in a government in which Israel is facing enemies that they basically identify with?
They do not identify with.
Don't tell them they identify. Balad, how many people in Balad are in jail?
Balad is only three. Balad is only three seats out of them. I've heard Ayman Odeh. I've interviewed Ayman Odeh. Ayman Odeh is not a Zionist. I grant you, he's not a Zionist. But he also
and therefore he shouldn't be allowed to run.
Why?
And therefore he shouldn't.
Why?
Be
Why? Only Zionist? No, it's not. No, it's not Zionist. No. Excuse me. None of the Haredi parties are Zionists.
The law says if you do not support Israel as a Jewish democratic state, you can't run.
That doesn't make you a Zionist.
You can't run.
That doesn't make you a Zionist. None of the Haredi parties are Zionists.
The Haredim do not oppose Israel as a Jewish state.
They do nothing for the Jewish state. They do nothing except cost the Jewish state money. So they should. Why should they run? Why should they have representatives? None of their children have to die for this country. Why should they have any representatives any more than the Arabs should? Just because they're Jewish? Is that what it is? Just because they're Jewish, they're okay? And because they're not Jewish, they're not okay?
The law says you have to be. If you do not support the Jewish, look.
How do you see the Arab parties involved in the?
I see a future. I don't know. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I see a future where there is no reason there's no reason why Ahmed Tibi would not be a better Minister of Health than Litzman. Let's be honest here. He's a very smart, very bright, a doctor who cares about health and health issues.
Yasser Arafat's advisor.
So he's Arafat's advisor.
No, that's all. You know, it's like saying in Britain we can have Hitler's advisor too.
Does that not? Does that?
No, it's a problem.
You know, you're listening to yourself.
We have a problem.
Are you listening to yourself? You want Arafat's advisor to be a minister in the Jewish state's government?
Why
really?
Not? Why not? People
Why?
change.
Because he's the enemy.
He's not. Why is he making Ahmed Tibi the enemy? Why?
Ahmed Tibi is making himself the enemy.
No,
unless you think.
Arafat is dead, and that period is over. We're in a different period of time. The only way.
So what happens if the unity government is formed without them, or rather formed with them? I mean, do you really think that Israel will cease to exist if they're part of a coalition?
I can't see Lieberman supporting a government or being part of a government that is dependent on the non-Zionist, anti-Israel Arab parties. I can't see it.
Listen, what you very well will see happen, this is my best guess, if there's going to be a coalition, is they're going to enter negotiation with the Arab parties. It seems clear that an agreement is about to be made. And that's when Likud decides to
move. That includes the Arab
party. Includes the Arab party. Outside or inside, it doesn't make a difference. But it's clear that there is going to be a government without Likud. At that point, Likudniks are going to say, wait a second. There's two options here. Either we move aside Netanyahu and we form a government without him, or we go to the opposition.
But you're also predicating that, on the idea that Lieberman will let go of his issues and join this government
First of all, it can all be a big bluff. Remember something, we're talking about a bluff here. We're not talking about necessarily what the government's going to look like. The way to get the Likud to break is to make it look more and more feasible that there's an alternative without them. That's what Blue and White has to do, is they have to create the atmosphere that says we don't need Likud, we're going to create...
They have to be willing to follow through on that bluff.
Well, of course, that's part of the issue. That of course, any sort of bluff, that's always the question when you're bluffing. But the reality is that is a situation that will get the Likud to decide, time has come, it's time to move on, he's been around long enough. I mean, every single person in Likud, in the leadership in any case, is all waiting for Likud to go. So, and frankly, most polls show that Likud will do just as well without Netanyahu as they will with Netanyahu. So the reality is...
I haven't seen those polls. I don't know what polls
with Sarin ahead, the Likud does just as well as they did with Netanyahu. I don't know about the side parties, but certainly Likud does just as well because Netanyahu is not as popular as he once was. Look at it this way. Think of what he ran on the last election, right? He ran on Trump. Not exactly right now as big an electoral plus as he was 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. He ran on Putin. That's also not, that's what he ran on. Those were his big posters were him and Trump, him and Putin, and then he ran on the fact that Israel is the most secure it's ever been. Look at the great security we've had. We just heard him on his little presentation just now saying these great dangers are lurking in the immediate future, and that's why we need a coalition government. So which one do we believe? Do we believe the Netanyahu of the campaign that said, I brought about the most peaceful, most wonderful situation strategically for Israel in history, or Netanyahu post-election who's saying that we're in a terrible, dire situation and we need to make...
You can't deny the realities in Israel under Netanyahu for the last 10 years. The GDP per capita has soared. Our diplomatic relations have multiplied. We've made inroads into Africa. Brazil, who once wouldn't accept our ambassador, now is Israel's greatest friend. He had good relations both with the United States and with Russia.
You're making
he sat out the most antagonistic U.S. administration in decades with Obama. You cannot belittle his achievements. People run on their achievements.
Excuse me, I can belittle his achievements. He has destroyed Israel's relationship with the Democratic Party, without a shadow of a doubt. With all the Democratic Party. With all the Democratic. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He went. No, excuse me. He went straight and has embraced the Republicans 100% before the last election. Before the last election. Before that. No, quite clearly he's been in that position. And he has done that single-handedly. Yes, we've gone ahead GDP. We've done marvelously economically, although it's very limited. We have a tremendously strong engine called the high-tech sector that has pulled along the whole rest of the Israeli economy. The rest of the Israeli economy is still in trouble, but the high-tech sector has been doing wonderfully. You can say that he had something to do with that, mostly when he was Minister of Economics, Minister of Finance 12 years ago. That's when he did most of the good things. We have now one of the greatest disparities between wealth anywhere in the OECD, that's Israel under Netanyahu. It's Israel under his tax policies that's created this great disparity of wealth that exists in this country. Prices here in Tel Aviv are higher than any other city except maybe one. It's top 10 in expenses anywhere in the world, while our salaries are somewhere down in the lower part of the OECD. So yes, things are much better than they
How
were.
can that be?
They're much better than they were 10 years ago.
No, those statistics are true, actually.
They're absolutely true.
Back
So
up.
the fact of the matter is that that's what's happened. Now, I'm not blaming him for that, but you can't give him credit for that either.
Oh, so you can't give the Prime Minister credit for what happens in the country. You can only blame him for...
No, I'm giving him credit for the boost in the high-tech world that has occurred and that's pulled
that's
the Israeli
the only thing.
In terms of the economy, yes. I'm definitely giving him credit for that. I'm not giving him credit for our relations in terms of what's happened in the United States. I think he deserves some credit for his standing in parts of Brazil, his relation with Hungary, his relation with India. On the other hand, his relationship with Western Europe is not exactly wonderful. His relationship with dictators all over the world have seemed very, very good.
Like which dictators?
Hungary would be one example.
The new Polish democratically elected.
Yeah, okay, but he's democratically elected.
Right wing does not necessarily mean dictator.
Okay, fine. The right wing pushing themselves to the oligarchs.
Explain to me in short words how we could make people like Omar or Cortez pro-Israel.
I'm not trying to make Omar and Cortez. Omar and Cortez do not represent the
They're the most influential.
No, they're not the most influential. That's the Republican propaganda. The most influential is Nancy Pelosi and the mainstream.
She's anti-Israel.
She's not anti-Israel, but she's not as pro-Israel as she once was. It's certainly not pro-Netanyahu. The reality is what...
So she wants to choose the Prime Minister.
No, I'm not asking her to choose Netanyahu. I'm saying that he has hurt our relation. When he went in front of Congress to oppose the nuclear deal, when it was a fake that company already. He accomplished nothing angering the Democrats.
Netanyahu should not. I mean, as the Prime Minister, isn't it his job to fight vociferously for the country?
He shouldn't. He should have fought vociferously and said, okay, I don't like this agreement. I think it has lots of negatives, but let me at least come to the table. I will take the great package of things Obama was offering, God knows what, in terms of arms and everything else in order to support it. I will take whatever I can get. In addition, I will sit at the table to try to improve the agreement. Instead, what he did was go head to head with the President of the United States and accomplish nothing.
That he could have done nothing.
That's not
nothing
true.
To change it.
That's not true. It's absolutely not true. He could nothing to exchange it when he went up against it.
Obama placed a mendacious dilemma before the world and the American people. He said it's either this deal or war, and it's obviously not, because Trump has gone back, reneged on the agreements. If he had kept up the sanctions, Iran would have been on its knees. We could have called them to give up the nuclear project.
Unfortunately, gentlemen, we have to end it there. We'll have to see maybe next week on our next chapter of the elections arena how the coalition negotiations are actually progressing and whether or not any inroads are actually occurring. In the meantime, Mark Schulman, Dr. Martin Sherman, thank you so much for coming in. And of course, thank you to all of you for watching. And remember to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News and on our website, of course, at ILTV.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Until next time.